Regular viewers may be aware that I started a Substack recently, the core aim of which isn't so much political but personal. That's because I believe, in opposition to the dominant liberal zeitgeist of the age, that a state can't make people healthy, well and positive. In fact, it's a people that makes a state healthy and stable. Now, I started thinking about this dynamic many years ago when I knew someone who was a heroin addict. And that guy was actually being given money by the state at the time, disability benefit, job seekers allowance, that sort of thing. And I remember thinking, this is mad. What do you think a heroin addict is going to spend money on? Now, this all came to mind for me recently because I saw this piece online. It's about San Francisco and the homeless there. For those who don't know, San Francisco in California is now full of homeless drug addicts, and it's really violent and dangerous. This is a fascinating insight into the naivety of the liberal approach. They seem to believe you can just help the homeless by housing them. They have a complete disrespect for history, tradition, hierarchy, the role of men in formulating other strong and disciplined men. Now, if we had such a system, most of these men wouldn't have fallen into this trap in the first place, but that's a video for another time. For now, it's interesting to see the results of such liberal naivety. Now, this story focuses on a homeless woman who's living in one of these shelters paid for by the government. It's a rundown century-old hotel in the Tenderloin. That's a very violent area of San Francisco where a rodent infestation became so severe that this lady had to pitch a tent inside her room to keep the mice away. Residents have threatened each other with knives, crowbars and guns, sometimes bringing the police to the building several times a day. Since 2020, 9 people have died of drug overdoses. Now, this gets to the heart of a very harsh truth in modern society that we often ignore. You can't just house homeless people and that's problem over. They have severe problems that run very deep, and that means the solutions have to be a lot deeper than we can presently fathom. This is why I wrote a piece on my Substack called Why Every Man Needs 3 Fathers. The idea is we all need a father present with us as we grow up to introduce us into discipline and structure, ideally at least a male elder if a father's not around. On top of that, we need a cultural father. That's like a tradition which can guide us and hold us steady. It gives us a shared moral law that we can all join into, and we can make sense of the world together that way. And on top of that, God the Father for those who are drawn to spiritual expressions where you can get beyond the limitations of the ego, fear and anxiety, and sink into the peace of being. However, our society has decided we don't need such a structure. Apparently it's toxic and evil. Instead, we need liberal ideas that are straight out of John Lennon's Imagine, that make us feel good, even if they don't make any real change in the world. It's this same naive leftist idealism from Bushra Shake. She's a Pakistani TV commentator here in the UK. She states, wealthy B-words blame immigrants for all the problems while using them to get richer. Most of us grow out of this nonsense at 17. However, to be fair, she is right in that wealthy people often do want to use cheap labour and mass immigration to inflate their profits. But she is in a world of leftist fantasy when she states that wealthy people are blaming immigrants. It's the complete opposite. They have pushed multiculturalism. They have pushed mass immigration. Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, they've all been liberal leftists who've pushed those causes. Even Elon Musk, that supposed Nazi, was more than willing to push Indians to come in via H-1B visas to take the jobs of Americans. In essence, the globalist system is incredibly pro-mass immigration. That's why we have so much of it. The only people against it is the average guy on the street who'll get told he's evil and racist and so on. I suppose to people like Bushra Shake, the creeping takeover of the UK is just some optical illusion we're all suffering from because of rich people. Just like asylum seekers loitering outside schools is all part of our imagination. In another display of typical liberal naivety, the police here said that they were going to speak to the migrants because it's just a misunderstanding and a, quote, cultural issue. Talking of liberal naivety, Big Dave Lammy's back, and for some reason he wants us to think about Sudan.
Over Sudan's border, just behind me, its people are suffering the biggest humanitarian catastrophe on the planet. I just sat with a woman who showed me the burn marks. She had been burnt by soldiers.
Well, that's very sad, Dave. However, I'm still following your advice from a few years ago. Remember when you said this? The world does not need any more white saviours. As I've said before, this just perpetuates tired and unhelpful stereotypes. Let's instead promote voices from across the continent of Africa and have serious debate. So I'm sorry to hear about what's going on in Sudan, but quite frankly, we've got big problems over here in the UK, and as the saying goes, you need to help yourself before you can help other people. Not to mention, even if we do try and help the Sudanese, we'll just be called racist anyway by the Liberals. Now this video may have been a bit disjointed, but the aim was to show you 3 examples of how a naive liberal worldview doesn't really work. It doesn't correspond to reality, and in fact it just makes things worse down the line. So this is why I created the Substack. I'm aiming to create a resource for a collective of men to actually sort their lives out, so they're in some shape to help themselves and others down the line. I wrote a piece recently on a vision for the future and what I'm intending to do. Do check it out down below. In the meantime, let me know your thoughts and do consider subscribing to the channel if you're new.